Welcome. My name is Gena Timberman, and you are listening to Timber People, a podcast about people who, like timber, are strong, build and create, who gather us together like fuel that feeds fire. People who support structures of our community that uplift and protect. It is a real honor, just such a joy to welcome my longtime friend, Chuck Schroeder. I'm also happy to meet and to welcome Eric Grant. Thank you so much for you both being here. I said a little earlier, I welcome you to Timber People, a podcast about people that are creating and really developing like timber structures that uplift, protect, that share, that build and create. And this is the right conversation for that. I thank you for being here, but I'm really thank you for just welcoming me to your conversation as well. I've been so excited. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Well, Gena, this is Chuck. And it's just been such an honor to be able to come and join you here. You and I have a long friendship, long collaboration going back to creating the Braided Paths art show at the Oklahoma City Arts Festival years ago, as well as doing other things together that we always hoped would make the world a better, more humane place. And including, I always remember the ground blessing day that we started at the Cowboy Museum and then ended up on site during your work with the First Americans Museum, which is just an achievement of a lifetime.
Thank you so much.
So I'll never forget that.
Thank you. I just really want to acknowledge the, how valuable it's been to learn from you, and even from my early days of getting into the museum, work, of just learning from you in your position as CEO and the executive director of the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum, and just the support that you've always provided to me personally and professionally, and the friendship, and then going to see you in Nebraska. And it's just been such a joy to see the journey that you've been on, and to see how your artwork has evolved. And I'm excited to talk about that. And Eric, I really, learning about the book, it's a really special gift to write about someone, to learn about someone's writing, about someone they knew closely or know closely. And that is you're serving as a witness for important things to learn about people and their character and the impact that they have on the world around us. And I'm really excited to learn more about the book. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate both of you and the opportunity to be here today. I've known Chuck for probably going on 30 years.
Yeah, I was trying to count back. That's pretty much on track.
Yeah, I think it was maybe 94, so we're coming in on it. But been a great admirer of Chuck since the day I met him, and always loved his appreciation for language and his mastery of language, and being able to just get up and off the cuff speak to people. And I was never really gifted that way, and I've kind of watched him try to emulate the things that he does. But it's been really interesting for me the last few years the last decade to watch Chuck move from his profession of being a leader and a CEO of a lot of big organizations and companies into becoming a much more personal journey in a way, make that evolution in becoming an artist and a successful artist, because that is not an easy task to take on with your life's journey, as you know. So,
well, I think one of the really fun parts of this interaction today with the three of us is that it's a kaleidoscope when you look at our varied backgrounds, but art in each of our lives has brought us around this table today. And it's such a connector of people. And Gena, you have been a connector as long as I've known you across every conceivable line, culturally and otherwise. But here we are today to talk about art and the way that it has, for millennia, given people an opportunity to cross those lines and come to understand each other better, and in a beautiful way that reaches way down into that part of us where language can't even communicate. It's a language of the spirit. So.
Absolutely. And thank you so much. Timber is a fuel that, you build a fire, people come to it for warmth, to gather. And that's what this is really about. And I appreciate you for being a people connector. Those relationships are important. And I've met many people because of you, and I deeply value that. Thank you.
Well, listen, this is going to be kind of fun. We're here to talk about Eric's recently released book, Hollis Williford, The Crossing at the River, which is really a remarkable accomplishment. Well, listen, Eric, it's easy to say, well, okay, so you're an author, and of course you have your own communication company. You've been in the communication business for your whole career and done that successfully. But this book is really a very different chapter in that life of communication. So to begin with, you never describe yourself as an artist, but I have watched your photography now over decades. You have some extraordinary artistic skills in composition, color, and the strength of emotion, even in the work that you do, not counting shooting pictures of cows and that kind of stuff. But talk a little bit about where that came from, and because it, to me, is really at the heart of this book. Yes, it's Hollis's art, but you have presented it in a way that is really, I think, extraordinary.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, Chuck. I've always been a little hesitant to consider what I do as a photographer or as a writer as art. And it's partly because I always wanted to stay hungry and never wanted to have a sense of arrival. And so, as you know, I have shot tens of thousands of photos in some of the most beautiful places on the planet.
You got me up at 4:30 in the morning to shoot one of those. Now, believe me, yeah, I know. Yeah, this isn't just hanging out with your brownie, Yeah,
and they were good photos.
They were good photos.
But other than a few snapshots I've taken of family and a few other things with my iPhone, I don't have anything hanging on my wall that I've ever shot, and it's a fear of saying I've made it, and I at some point. Maybe my boys or maybe my grandkids will want to hang up some pictures that I took. But for me, it's like I just want to stay hungry and I never want to feel like I got there. But my background, I was an English major in college. I studied some of the greatest literary works in history. I have a sense for plot and story construction and those kinds of things. And I'm able to see those things, I think, in some ways in photography and also in my writing that maybe other people who don't have that background do. But I think even farther back than that, one of the things I think that society has lost in general is the art of the conversation. And I remember sitting in my grandparents' living room on the ranch and listening to my grandpa tell stories. And we weren't looking at our iPhones or, interrupting. We were listening to how he would build those plots and those themes into his stories. And that's always stayed with me. And so I had, a very beginning, a great background in understanding how stories are put together and what makes a good story and what doesn't.
Well, that obviously is a gift. And I was reminded as we were having dinner and a drink or two last night, your capacity as a storyteller and to draw that out of others it's a fun element of life. You and I shared a little earlier today, life moves so fast now that we too rarely sit down together as friends and just to tell stories. But it so enriches the life of everybody within earshot, even folks in the next booth, I think. But anyway, yeah, you really have that capacity.
Yeah, and along those lines, one of the mantras at my company has been, is particularly in developing young people to become professional videographers or photographers or writers, is in a conversation, don't finish each other's sentences. Mm-hmm. And there's a huge temptation today to rush to the end of the thought. And 50% of the time when you're talking to someone that they're finishing your sentences, they're wrong. They don't have the patience to let it play out and actually let that situation resolve. So we work on that a lot. In fact, there's probably not a week that doesn't go by that I don't mention it in a meeting, or, it's really important. Listening is really important.
Gena, I have to interject this because as Eric talks, it just reminds me of my early interactions with you. And one of the things that just opened my heart to you is that you do listen to the end of the statement. And I have never seen you talk over someone else or fail to be listening. And it's, and anyway, when I see you in this role now, and this, again, taking your whole connecting mission to this level, it just strikes me that that's in Gena's heart. That's just how you roll.
Thank you. It's a gift for me to hear you say that. Thank you. I really appreciate your comment about the construction of the story, because to end the sentence or to end the story would assume that everything is linear, that it ends. So there are so many cultural experiences and stories that are shared that draw upon things that happened many, many years ago. And that is really important. Is there really there is a process for a construction of one's own story, how they tell it, and sometimes it's not always linear, and it's really, it can be very interesting and unsuspecting.
Yeah, and to swing this back to the book a little bit, I remember when I wrote this thing. I actually wrote it in Oklahoma City. Took me 28 years to get to it, but I finally sat down, escaped to Oklahoma City to write it. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm not going to write this A to Z. And so I wrote a short biography that's in the front part of the book that basically allowed me to get off the hook and telling the story in a linear fashion. I'm going to tell the story the way I want to tell the story. And I honestly don't really care what anybody thinks. I'm just going to do it my way.
Well, it's beautifully done. And as Gena was talking, I thought, my gosh, this is just describing the book. So listen, Hollis Williford has been gone for a while. Extraordinary guy. And your intersection with Hollis's life is worth a movie in itself. It's fascinating. But let's start back to front a little bit. Talk about Hollis and why people should be interested in him and this story.
Well, Hollis Williford was an artist who was born in Texas, wound up in Colorado for a number of reasons, but we can go into that in a little bit. But he died in 2007. I think it's interesting he died the same year that the iPhone came out. Mm-hmm. And it was really kind of a point of demarcation in history. And I'm not sure he'd be happy to be living today with the loss of freedom and the intrusion of big tech and things into our lives as a result of technology. I just don't think he'd be comfortable with it. But there are a couple things that I think Hollis did. One was he came from nowhere. He had a very poor background. His father abandoned him when he was young, but still he had this hunger, and I think it's really, I remember when I first started thinking about writing this thing, I asked Crystal Albers, who works for Grant Company, she asked me, well, what's the most important thing that he wants people to know? I said, I think it's that couple things. One is that he wants people to know that he didn't waste a life, that every moment of your life can set the tone for the rest of your life, all those little things. And another theme was that he wanted to be an inspiration to, quote, any barefooted kid that walked into a museum that saw his work and wanted to be inspired by it. And he was always looking out for that kid. And I happen to be one of those people that came into his life. And I think as the book has come out and I've gotten to meet more people that knew him, they all kind of say had the same parallel experience. This guy took time with me. He took time with me when I was at that point in my life where I thought, I'll go be an auto mechanic or I might be an artist. And Hollis banked him back into being an artist. Not that there's anything wrong with being an auto mechanic, but the world needs more of those. But he had an incredible effect on other people. You would go up to his studio in Loveland, Colorado, and be just absolutely mesmerized by his studio. It was just an energized place. But he had a profound impact on me, and hundreds of people that he steered into living a creative, productive life. But I think the big one for him really was, don't waste it. This is it. This is all you got,
Well, I think it's important for people to know who are familiar with the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum that Hollis won the did he win it twice?
Twice, yeah.
Won the Prix de West Purchase Award, which is the highest honor at the annual Prix de West Art Invitational Show and Sale. And you talk about touching people's lives. One of those winners was Welcome Sundown, which anybody who's been to the Cowboy Museum knows it's the major sculpture out in front of that museum that visitors from all over the world have seen, have touched, and have felt the power of that great sculpture. And of course, the Snake Priest, the other piece that won the Prix de West, which is of course a much smaller piece, is just one of the most electrifying works that during the time I was at the Cowboy Museum, I revisited it many times. It's very, very powerful. So he was at the height of his power. He was arguably one of the great Western artists in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no doubt. And the amazing thing to me on another level of just looking at his artwork, he was one of these guys that could do anything. He was a sculptor one day, and if he got tired with that, he'd go draw for a week or two, or he'd paint, or he'd etch. But he was constantly creating. And I think in some ways, rather than some people who just paint, they get painter's block or writer's block. I think they kind of get locked up. Hollis was able to shift gears and to create in other areas. And honestly, the book has one of his better known paintings on the cover or on the dust jacket. And I personally, I don't want to say I didn't like his paintings, but his sculpture eclipsed his paintings because it's so, as you say, electrifying. But his paintings are very peaceful places. And until we tried to print this book, I didn't have a full appreciation for what he was trying to do with color and composition, because when you go in a printing press and you're trying to match that painting, it's almost an impossibility because of the complexity of the colors he was dealing with. He was a very, very smart guy. And his paintings are beautiful. And I have probably more of an appreciation for his painting than his other work now, than as a result of creating a book.
Okay, so thinking about his work, I love this story. And you talk about this book taking 30 years to write. Yeah. I want you to begin with your first interaction with this obscure etching you find in a little gallery in Denver, and you'd never heard of Hollis Willeford, hardly, and tell that story and how that led to your engagement and his invitation to you.
Yeah, it was one of those sunsplash late September day, deep blue sky, color starting to appear in the trees. I just remember that. And my wife and I had just bought a house in Northwest Denver, had nothing to hang on the walls, nothing really to furnish the house with. And so we went antiquing and stepped into this little antique store, and there behind the cash register was this little etching of a wagon train called Teams and Dreams. And it kind of stuck with me. And I don't remember if I went home and went back, but I bought it. It was about $200, I think. And we took it home, put it right in the heart of the house where all the points of convergence are. You have to go to the bathroom, you got to go by it, you go to the bedroom, you got to go by it, go to the living room. It was one of those. And I just loved it. And because of my training in plot and story construction, I could tell immediately that whoever created it had a sense of, it's not just a composition, it's not just drawing, it's also placing your subject on the continuum line of the plot to where it's the most interesting. Most artists, or a lot of artists, who create dull work, or artists who create dull work or uninteresting work, it might be beautifully compositionally or color-wise, place the point of the plot after the climax. Hollis had a gift of placing his work at the moment right before the climax, so that you didn't know which direction the plot was going to go. It was the infinite possibilities at that moment. And what I saw in the etching was a couple of covered wagons with oxen, and the front team had stopped, and the oxen had turned their head just slightly to the right. Like, what have they seen? Mona Lisa's the stereotypical example of not knowing what that plot, where she's going to land with it. Anyway, so I knew he was good, and it's a very basic etching. I mean, it's just a very basic composition, and I kind of thought about it a while. A couple months later, I thought, I got to call this guy. So, or find out if he's alive. So I called some galleries, and they said, well, we think he actually lives north of Denver. So I called information. That's when you used to dial 1411. Yeah. And they said, Hollis Williford. And they said, 970-669-2967. Still remember the phone number. So I called him, and he invited me to come up that night, and I loaded the family up, and we headed up. And pitch black, late November night, and pulled in the driveway, wasn't a light on anywhere. Thought, I don't know if this is the right place, but I walked up to check out. There's 2 wagon wheel windows and a door, and I kind of peered up and I saw Welcome Sundown, the big statue in clay form in his studio, and I thought, holy crap, this guy's more than an etcher. This guy's a real deal. But that was what started our friendship that night. We bought a few more etchings from him, and then the next day I was so inspired by what I had seen, I sat down the next morning and I wrote this letter to him of thank you, and I it was the best thing I'd ever written in my life. I mean, just completely inspired moment, and I fired it off, mailed it to him before email. And 2 weeks later, I followed up with him, and he said, hey, why don't you come up here? I want you to write my book, my biography. So,
yeah. I mean, that part of it, we see the book here 30 years later, but it actually began with him asking you to write his story. Yeah. And he had strong views about how that story should be written.
Yes, he did. Yeah.
Well, before we get, you said the word moment, and that is so important. I think recognizing the moment. I mean, even in the artwork there's something happened, something creates that sense of curiosity that encourages us to explore and learn more. And so you taking that becomes a reciprocal relationship between the person, giving the invitation or the artist. It's like, and then you share, like you connected, and that's really important, that relationship. And so the moment is important. And so that's really great.
Yeah, I think the lesson, I think, for me is from all that was, if you do nothing, nothing happens. Yeah. And just the fact that I, at 26, 27 years of age, knew something was at play. Mm-hmm. But if I wouldn't have called information and not worried about it, that this central piece of my life would never have happened. And it all comes down to just saying, okay, I'm going to call this and see if I can track down. And I think that goes back to what Hollis said. You've only got one crack at it, Right. And at the same time, every moment of your life, you can redefine the trajectory of your life.
Right. It's like, if not you, then who, Right. Yeah. People face daunting experiences or challenges. And if you're not going to do it, then who will? And so, yeah, it's great.
So listen, Eric, this book, I have shelves full of coffee table art books. Okay. And beautiful imagery. This is really a rare art book in my view, and that and it is as interesting to read as it is to peruse visually. A lot of those books are not. They are academically well done, well documented. They're not very interesting to read. This is something entirely different because of your relationship with Hollis, you were able to reflect his character and his personality, as well as his phenomenal sculptures, paintings, and drawings. This guy, if you'll excuse the term, this guy was no Tootsie Pretzel, as my mother used to say, in a beret and a smock, going humbly through the world. I want you to talk a little bit about Hollis the man, because it, again, across this relationship that you had with him, there were times when you had to deal with a little bit of conflict and some very strong feelings about how things should go. And he was a man's man, as you would say. So I'd talk a little bit about him.
Yeah, he was in one moment or one day, he'd be the kindest, most gentle, generous human being you'd ever meet. Then there were other times when he had his fight with the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum over the future of the National Academy of Western Arts and Prix de West. He felt like at the time, this was probably the single biggest fight he actually had in his life. Actually, I can list a couple of them here. Over the future of the Prix de West, and how commercially do we want to make this would have been his argument. He always felt like, man, I have fought my way to get in here. Why are we going to open this door up to everybody? And he wanted to keep it more, not as an elite, smaller organization of people who kind of paid a blood price in getting into it. I remember, you remember the McNeil-Lehrer report on PBS?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
He was asked to appear on that show over the future of the National Endowment for the Arts. Do you remember that big fight they had back in the 90s? Yeah. And he was very much against government funding of the arts. He just didn't like it. He thought that it needed to stand on its own merits, and he got on the air and laid it out there. And looking back, you kind of cringe a little bit because he was so outspoken. He was tough, not necessarily combative, but he would tell you what he was thinking. But he was always good. He was always good, and he was always fair to people, and everybody who knew him loved him. They really, really respected him. I remember, there were times he had diabetes, and he had heart failure in the middle of creating Welcome Sundown, and he nearly died, I think, at least once. He was able to recover. He was in a way, his desire to create was so strong that it also resulted in his own destruction. It killed him eventually. He died at 66. That's not an old man, Part of it was, that the technology wasn't there for diabetics today, to keep away from those wild swings in blood sugar levels and those kinds of things. And he would get kind of loopy at times because he was just so passionate about creating work that he wouldn't remember to take care of himself. He smoked in the 80s. He had quit by the time I'd met him, but he just, honestly hadn't really taken very good care of himself in some cases. But he was always creating, always. And he just his hands were just going all the time and scraping his pocket knife and scraping his fingers. And then he'd get in these moods where he'd get really quiet and focused. And you say, okay, he's in creative mode. You need to leave him alone. And I'd go away, and the next time I come back, there'd be something there that he would have created just out of nothing. I think his younger brother, Ronnie, who had worked for him for many years, recalls a story. Hollis sat down with his accountant one time, and they did an evaluation amount of time that he actually spent creating art. And it ended up being less than 16% of his day because there were so many things that were drawing him away from it. And I think that hurt him too. And really, we paid the price for that today because we don't get to see what he would have created if he had that 84% of that time to be fully creative, But
he was a big outdoorsman, and one of the interesting things about your book, when I think of his work, I think of things like we've had at the Cowboy Museum, but he did a lot of work around wildlife and was really committed to understanding them. He wasn't just working from photographs. I mean, he was in the field a lot and studying, and he was a hunter and sportsman, and
Yeah, we had a deer jump through a windshield one time. We were out hunting together and spilled his coffee all over his chest. But
I'm glad that's all that happened.
Tear off a rearview mirror, and it was awful. But no, I think one of the things that people really need to understand about his work was how authentic it was and how much research he went into it. I mean, he went back to the original sources. So he went up to the Northwest Territories in Alaska and studied the Athabascans and the Inuits and
his studies of various native cultures was extensive.
Yeah, it was very, very extensive. He wasn't just dealing in stereotypes. He was dealing in. He had a saying that firsthand experience is the straightest arrow in your quiver. And so he would always go out and experience what he was eventually going to try to create. And I think he was unique in that way in a lot of respects, that he really strove to get out and see things and experience it and then felt comfortable in the creation of whatever he was trying to do. But his Inuits was really his last, not his last, but is really a great series. He did a lot of Native American dancers, and he loved dance. He was enjoyed dance himself. He was just transfixed by it. But you see, as you look at the span of his life's work, kind of the dissipation of energy as well, because toward the end of his career, he did a series of highly commercially successful pieces about fishermen, but they were all only, 8 inches tall, and so he went from doing 12, 13-foot monuments to these little itty-bitty fishermen that sold well, but didn't also require the physical, strenuous aspects of creation. So,
you brought up that experience and first-person perspective. That really is so important. I mean, in storytelling, and aspects of healing and learning and the trust. And I think that's also really important in the fact that you wrote the book from that first hand of knowing him and being, having that friendship, that relationship with him.
And Ronnie, his brother, has also commented that it's probably better that this was done after Hollis passed away. And there wasn't a day that didn't go by for 20-some years that I wasn't thinking about, man, what woulda, coulda, should have been with this book. I mean, it ate at me all the time. I just couldn't write it. I just didn't have it in me.
Well, and plus your own career was, you were pretty consumed in making a living too.
But I just couldn't do it. I didn't have the key to the lock. And, boy, did I struggle with it. And then at some point it's just never going to happen. But then, around COVID, the world changed a lot. And it became very clear to me during that period how fleeting things actually were. And I thought, man, if you don't do this, it's not going to happen. And it was, I had an audio book that was a series of essays. And I thought, man, I'm not capable of a sustained writing effort of 80,000 words. I just can't. I don't have that in me. But I can write 500 or 600 words at a time and just do short essays, impressions, because that's really what a painting is, or a sculpture. It's not you can say a lot with a little. And I thought, I think I can do that. So I got a rental car and I booked a hotel down here in Oklahoma City. And it was April. I said, okay, I'm going to go do this. And if when I come back, the first round of this will be written. And I told that to a bunch of people, and nothing like elevating the pressure, you know.
I got that call
That's
from
commitment.
you, and I honestly, Eric, it just lit me up that you were making this commitment to take this project. It was either going to, I believe your words to me is, I'm either going to get this done or it's going to die.
Yeah.
Right. And how daunting that, I mean, that's a tall task to write about someone that you respect so much. And that means, so much to you. And, they say there's only one way to eat an elephant is one bite at a time, and it's great that you took that journey like one step at a time, just writing, as much as you could and got into the trenches with it, especially during that time of life.
Yeah. And there were very few people that I told about Hollis and my relationship with him for probably 20 years. Chuck was one of them. And I would come down once in a while and kind of cry on Chuck's shoulder and tell him about Hollis. And he would say, well, we got a great archivist down in the basement, a resource, but, like I don't have it here. But amazingly, once I started to write, it was easy. And I think that was a real lesson in that, again, if you don't do it, no one else is going to. Right. And so taking that first step, I remember that first morning, I thought, okay, my best mind time is, 4 a.m. to 9 a.m. or something like that. So I'm going to get up every morning at 4 a.m. and I'm just going to write just as fast as I possibly can. Just go, just fast you can go. And I got up, or the alarm went off, and that little voice, like, just stay in bed a little longer, it's cold. But I started, get up, Eric, get up and get this going. And I wrote like 3 essays in 4 hours, and then I was averaging about 5,000 words a day. It just exploded.
Well, like Hollis, you were getting in your zone, and that's when you just need to,
yeah, I just needed a kick in the pants. But yeah, that was a big relief. That was a big relief to finally have that down. So,
but see, accepting that about yourself or that self-knowledge that you write best in essay-sized chunks is what makes this book so readable. I mean, I honestly love just picking it up and opening to any of the sections and finding a thought, an impression, a story here that I can consume and think about. And again, it's not linear. And I think it's what makes it special.
Mm-hmm. I really appreciate, knowing where the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum and Preta West has put, Oklahoma on the artistic map and artistic integrity. And I really appreciate all of the hard work and commitment that you've had over the years and the support from so many people, like you, Eric, and others. And to know that, it's really so much about awareness of the artists and the art. And so books like this are really important to really understand that, have that influence and the inspiration that artists like Hollis provide to others.
Yeah, and I think also not all of it's pretty.
Right.
And I think some of the street cred that Hollis has is the bad parts of his life, that he was able to overcome it. And I think not that all of us have the ability to be a painter or a sculptor, but I think we all have the ability to be better than what we are. And I think there's so much value that's left on the table in most lives. We didn't maximize the value, And you were asking me earlier about, if I'm an artist or whatever, I think for me, the process of the book for me personally was that it created value in myself that I didn't know was there. And by that, I mean, I published magazines, I've done all that, but now I know how I'd have done it differently. There's value in that. I made a lot of mistakes in just the production processes of this book that I wouldn't do now. That's value. That's the getting to A to Z more efficiently, And I think sometimes that's the intangibles other side of going through a process like this, that you find something in you or you create something in yourself that you didn't know was there, So if somebody were to come up to me and say, "Hey, I want a book like that," I would know how to get there a lot quicker than this one.
Well, that's about journey and your growth as a person and a writer. Also, I'll just say that just meeting the challenge in and of itself is really meaningful. Like to know that there's, just shaking hands with the challenge that's big too.
Yeah. Along those lines, one thing I do want to mention is that this thing doesn't happen without a lot of other people being involved, like conversations with you and friends. But I have a very talented team of people. Bart Ashford did the graphic design. Crystal Albers was always helping me to find clarity in the editing. I mean, and it's funny because when I wrote the book, I'm like, I don't care what anybody thinks, blah, 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 blah. But as soon as you start getting closer and closer to the printer, you start going, okay, we better really fact check this thing because this thing's going to be taken seriously. So we had waves of editors and proofreaders and people looking at the book to make sure that it had, some integrity to it, and to the information that was in it. So it couldn't have gotten done without a lot of people's knowledge and wisdom. So I want to do a shout out to them.
Sure.
Yeah.
Plus, I know there were people around you, Eric, on your team, as well as others in your circle of acquaintances and influencers who were there to say, don't be afraid. Sherry McGraw is unquestionably one of my dearest mentors as an artist and who really forced me into the position of saying, hey, I'm going to commit my life to this. And while doing the first major commission that I ever did was of Blessed Stanley Rother, who's the shrine is in his honor here in Oklahoma City. And I was working in Sherry's studio, and I started with this very small, modest painting of Father Rother that I thought was the limit of my capabilities, and I just didn't want to screw it up. And she would come in every day and just say, no, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. And so it went from that small, modest to actually putting him in the 500-year-old church where he served before he was martyred, and including the retablos on the shelf in the back and an elderly woman in the crowd looking up at him. But she would just say constantly, don't be afraid. And we so need the whole human experience, as you've described here, which I think is so beautiful, about going beyond what we think we can do. It does require some outside intervention at key moments, and I see that here in your work.
Well, and Chuck, following your journey as an artist, and it's just been incredible, the work with, Father Rother, but to know that you're constantly seeking like instruction and knowledge and understanding of how to, advance and push different aspects of your artwork together or forward as an artist is just really important too. And it's been really inspiring for me and others to see too.
I should mention that today Chuck was the only artist at the Prix de West at the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum that was walking around with a notepad taking notes. Were you?
Well, that may be.
Doesn't that say something?
That's sort of what I do.
Yeah, but that kind of says something.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
We're here in Oklahoma City right now during the Prix de West, and recalling Hollis's time of conflict, if you will, with the folks who were running the Prix de West at the time. My favorite quote in your book is when Hollis says, if making money were our only objective, we ought to be selling paints and brushes rather than using them on canvas.
Yeah, he would lay it out there. Yeah.
Listen, you've mentioned Hollis's younger brother Ronnie 2 or 3 times, and I think we would be remiss not to say a word or two about Ronnie, because that was such an interesting story. I mean, 20 years difference in their ages, and so he grew up laying on the floor under Hollis's drawing board, literally. You've become very close with Ronnie, I know, and talk a little about him and what a phenomenal career he has had as an artist.
Yeah, Ronnie was born in 1960 when Hollis was 20 years old, and basically Hollis paid the hospital bill because his father couldn't, and became Ronnie's de facto dad. He said, basically, if I'm paying the hospital bill, the boy is mine.
Right.
And it started just a remarkable relationship between them. And as you say, Ronnie, worked at his feet on the floor drawing, and any paper that fall on the floor, Ronnie would grab it and draw. But in the fast forward to the mid 90s, the world recognized Ronnie's talents as well. And Ronnie went to work at Walt Disney as an animator, working on movies like Milan and The Hunchback of Notre Dame and a few other great famous movies that we grew up with. And now Ronnie lives as a fine artist in his own right in Florida near Daytona Beach. Loves Florida, loves going out looking at alligators and painting the swamps. And one of the really great things about writing this book has been becoming friends with Ronnie. And I mean, we were friends then, but we're close now, and we created a little documentary. I shoot films, and we did a nice little documentary.
Which is just beautiful. I've watched it repeatedly. It's a wonderful work of art in its own right.
And Ronnie, in a lot of ways, is a testament to Hollis's belief in freedom. And Hollis always said that the greatest gift I can give you is, the freedom of choice, to live your life the way you want to. And Ronnie and Hollis are very different people. But Hollis never criticized Ronnie for being his own person, and he encouraged it. And the world could use a lot more of that kind of thinking today.
Oh, my.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I really love the title of the book, The Crossing at the Water. I know the art has inspired that. But, for Native people, for humans, the waterways, or the crossing was where we connected, we traded, we learned from one another, the exchange. And I think it's really symbolic that you chose that title.
Yeah, and it's been the title from the beginning. And the reason I chose the lily pads for the cover was because Hollis is always flirting between those crossover points, between the realm above the water and the realm below the water, that liminal space between the two. And so I wanted the cover of the book to give you a sense of something being underneath it. And then the back photo of the book is him painting on an easel, and he's looking into the book. And but he was always flirting on that edge between life and death and the crossing points. And I think it was Stonewall Jackson, his last words when he died. He said, "Let us cross over the river and rest in the shade of the trees." There's something kind of archetypal about that moving into another realm. And that's what I wanted. That's where I wanted to place the book. A lot of people don't see that immediately, but I'm glad that you saw that because it was important. His name, Williford, is also, the crossing of the river where the willow trees are, and I just thought it worked. If you pull the dust cover off on the cover, the hardcover, there's also one of his etchings called Chippewa Solo, and that was always his favorite etching. And so I just thought that the two worked together. The use of the Lonesome Lily painting was a decision we made well into the printing process. I just woke up at 3 a.m. like so many other things in this book and just thought, oh my God, we need to put that thing on the cover. So right. We did not want to do, I had chosen against doing a dust cover. And then a month or two into the printing process, I thought, we got to get that on there. Yeah.
It's a beautiful book. And, as a Choctaw person, we have stories about crossing a river together. And there are times we couldn't cross a river unless we were holding one another's hands, and so I think that's really symbolic, thinking about, your journey when have friends like Chuck and others to support you of holding your hand at the crossing, through the process. It's really great. And their family, like Ronnie,
Yeah, and there definitely has been for me a pre-book and post-book aspect of my life.
Right.
You know, there's
And
definitely.
I want you to talk about that a little bit, Eric, because I think that's. I tell young people all the time, students I work with at the University of Nebraska, that three things: you have to know yourself, you have to earn and demand respect, and number three, you have to make choices, make decisions through the course of your life, and don't simply let others choose your course for you. And boy, this was a case where, I mean, you have always chosen your own course, but here was a huge decision, and I've just seen the change in you since this book was published. And talk about that a little bit, because it's so enriching.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a piece being with in a confused state. How's that sound? Because I don't know what the next step is. I know that this at least in my life, this monumental undertaking that happened, that began 3 decades ago, is now behind me. It's been a great, enjoyable process to put this into the hands of people and let them enjoy it. And that's like when one of your drawings or paintings goes up on a wall somewhere. It's you can't describe it. I'm at peace with Hollis. I wasn't. It was like he was waking me up every night. There wasn't a moment that didn't go by. He wasn't rapping on my inside of my skull somewhere. But I don't know where this goes. I don't know what it means. Other than I'm at peace with it, and the people who have the book seem to be at peace with it too. Yeah. And I think that the process of doing the book has also allowed people like Ronnie and Hollis's wife, Debbie, to find peace with this as well. That he never really got the send off. And he left this remarkable legacy of artwork around the country, but there was nothing to cohesively bind that. And so a big part of what I've done is to send this out to, the Texas Interlibrary Loan Program and to his Texas high school and to all the universities that he attended as part of his, making sure that any barefooted kid that walks into those schools can find inspiration in his work.
That's awesome. Peace is freeing. And from what you've shared, he believed in freedom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he did. Yeah.
So where can people buy this book?
They can, thank you for the plug. Yeah, we have a website set up. It's holliswilliford.com, just HOLLISWILLIFORD.com. And we get the order. We'll ship it out that day and hope you enjoy it.
It's a beautiful book. I can't wait to read it. And Chuck, where can people learn about your artwork and what you're doing? You're doing so many incredible things. And
well, thank you. Yeah, actually, we established a website. I work with a group of young entrepreneurs in Lincoln that I just love, and they helped me develop a website that is schroederfineart.com, and you can go there and see my work. And I have a one-man show at the Robert Henry Museum in Cozad this summer for the month of July. Then we'll have a show at the University of Nebraska in the fall. And next summer, I'm going to be back in Ogallala, Nebraska. It's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful place. Once again, I'll be there all summer in the Petrified Wooden Art Gallery in Ogallala. So anyway, we're having a lot of fun with that stuff. So, Miss Gena, your complex pathway through this life has led you, not unexpectedly from my perspective, into this role. Tell me where you're going from here.
I don't know. I really identify, Eric, with that sense of, kind of free falling for a minute, after the opening of the First Americans Museum and also the opening of the Choctaw Cultural Center. And, I'm an attorney by trade as well. And so my work in mediation is hopefully increasing more and more. And I really appreciate the opportunity for reconciliation. I think that's always going to be a part of my journey culturally. But if I can do that professionally as well, that's important to me. So I work with different tribal consultation, and I'm really blessed to be working with the Sentinez Band of Chumash Indians and opening their museum and cultural center. And it's beautiful, beautiful project, just a wonderful, wonderful community of people. And so I feel really blessed. And I just want to say thank you so much for you both being on the show, and my dear friend Chuck Schroeder and my new friend Eric Grant. And I know that, I can't wait to read, and I'm excited to learn if you will be working on any other projects like this in the future. And Chuck, I'm always excited to see what you're doing and learn about what you're doing. And we've talked about a book for you too. But you always, you never cease to amaze me. Thank you so much. Appreciate you both being on the show.
You're always challenging me to think beyond where I am. This is not new, Gena. Thank you. Thanks to both of you. This is been a rare treat. Thank you, Gena, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Gena.
Thank you so much.
Yakoki, thank you for joining us. Timber People is brought to you by the Possibilities Podcast platform.